Good morning, students. Yesterday we had seen how Mongols, who were considered to be just nomads for hundreds of years, they suddenly rose into prominence. And yes, students, it was actually a sudden surge in prominence. No one in the world had expected that one day, of all people, it would be the nomads of Mongolia, the Mongols, who would ultimately end up vanquishing everything that they found in their way. And one very interesting was what we saw yesterday was how, unlike the other great rulers and the generals who were always trying to convince the ruled that yes, they were a gift of God, and how they are there to liberate them and redeem them and raise their quality of life and their quality of living. Genghis Khan was not someone who would be trapped into all these misconceptions and confusions. He was very, very clear about the fact that yes, as he said very pompously, that yes, I am the punishment of God, and you must have done some and committed some great sins, and that is why God has sent me here. um, that's, nothing can be said after this. If someone comes up with this kind of an ideology, you cannot really counter him with a different ideology at all. So today we look at how did the Mongols create an empire that's what is written here, that dwarfed of the other world conqueror Alexander the Great. Now, in a pre-industrial age of poor technological communications, what skills were deployed by the Mongols to administer and control such a vast dominion? For someone so self confidently aware of his moral, divinely dispensed right to rule, how did Genghis Khan relate to the diverse social and religious groups that comprised his dominion? In the making of his imperium, what happened to this plurality? We need to start our discussion, however, with a humbler set of questions to better comprehend the social and political background of the Mongols and Genghis Khan. So, who were the Mongols? Where did they live? Who did they interact with? And how do we know about their society and politics? Social and political background. The Mongols were a diverse body of people linked by similarities of language to the Tatars, Khitan, and Manchus to the east, and to the Turkish tribes to the west. Some of the Mongols were pastoralists, and while others were hunter-gatherers. So there was a whole mix-up of people. They were into different occupations, and the pastoralists tended horses, sheep, and to a lesser extent, cattle, goats, and camels. They nomadized in the steppes of Central Asia, that is, in the grasslands of Central Asia, in a tract of land in the area of the modern state of Mongolia. This was, and still is, a majestic landscape with wide horizons, rolling plains ringed by the snow capped Altai Mountains to the west, and arid Gobi Desert in the south, and drained by Onon and Selenga rivers, and Mairad springs from the melting snows of the hills in the north and the west. So, students, you have to understand that it was a unique geography of the Mongol people which made them solid, sturdy, strong, right? They were not soft people because everything that they had, they knew that it was after a great amount of struggle and hardship. They never got anything on platter, right? Of course, no one does that. No one gets anything on platter anyways. But then in certain areas of geography, in certain areas and certain geographies, that is, I'm sorry, certain things are particularly hard to come by, particularly difficult to come by. And that is the reason why the people who have to really work it out, they are far more stronger and sturdier and made of a sterner stuff, as they call it, compared to people who get it quite easily. And the Mongols were genetically, they have become very strong, and they could adapt to different conditions, different geographies, different weather conditions, and they were amazing horsemen that we all know it. We have always known, even if you have not been a student of history, you must have read it somewhere that Mongols were amazing horsemen. Okay, it is said that a Mongol could sleep on his horse, he could take bath on his horse, he could do everything on his horse. They were amazing master horsemen, and that you have to understand. 800 years ago, that was a huge advantage, right? It was said that a Mongol boy, or a girl for that matter, they used to learn horse riding even before they learned walking properly. You know, as young as them, they knew how to at least balance themselves on the horse, right? A kid who was probably barely a year old, he or she would know how to balance herself or himself on the horse, even if he or she had not learned to walk properly on the ground. So that's how amazingly adapted they were. So that gave them a huge advantage when it came to Mongols, and when they decided to really come out of their own geography and wander into other territories and start conquering them, and one day become world conquerors. Nothing could have stopped them, actually, right? So that's what we would, and because how they were made, and the and the geography, which definitely played a great role. They were a humbler body of people than the pastoralists, making a living from trade in furs of animals trapped in the summer months. There were extremes of temperature in the entire region, harsh, long winters followed by brief, dry summers. Agriculture was possible in the pastoral regions during short part of the year, but the Mongols, unlike some of the Turks further west, did not take to farming. Neither the pastoral nor the hunting gathering economies could sustain dense population settlements, and as a result, the region possessed no cities. The Mongols lived in tents, gurs, and traveled with their herds from the winter to summer pasture lands. So essentially, as we just saw, instance, geography, the natural terrain, the weather conditions played a huge and an enormous role in making Mongols a very hardy kind of people. And that's what you have to understand. This is a very important line which is mentioned, that the neither pastoral nor the hunting gathering economies could sustain dense population, as well as and as a result the region possessed no cities. Unlike when you study the contemporary civilizations in different parts of the world, you come across fancy cities, great architectural buildings, grand temples dedicated to gods and goddesses and everything, but nothing of that sort is ever found mentioned in the Mongol land. Why? Because they always were pastoralists and hunters and gatherers, say it, so they were always on move. Because at once they had finished off uh, they've had but they have actually used the resources of a particular area, they have finished it off, then they would move to some other lands, and then to some other lands, and then they would return in different seasons, because that's how the cycle continued, and they were happy about it. And that continuous movement did not, and it never allowed them to become soft. They always were very, very hard people. So ethnic and language ties united the Mongol people, but the scarce resources meant that this society was divided into patrilineal lineages. The richer families were larger, possessed more animals and pasture lands. Now, this is something which is strange, which you would find even when you read about the different tribes in Africa, whereby it was their greatest possessions were always their livestock. Okay, they also led a similar kind of life, where they were certain people would be hunters, gatherers, and certain people would be pastoralists. So you this is there is a great commonality when you read about and study about the tribes of Africa, like you are reading right now about the Mongols. So, periodic natural calamities, either unusually harsh, cold winters, when game and stored provisions ran out, or drought which parched the grasslands, would force families to forage further afield, leading to conflict over pasture lands and predatory raids in search of livestock. So, students, what you have to understand, what is essentially this paragraph tells you is that, even if the Mongols, as from different tribes, did not want to fight among themselves, but the kind of life they led, where they were always on move, right? It forced them to. They could not have remained peaceful even if they wanted to, right? Because they were always in movement, they were always on move. Sometimes their animals needed food, sometimes their animal needed to drink water, sometimes they needed to drink water, they needed to feed themselves. And while in movement, whenever they felt that yes, this is the best place to probably have their tents, and then this is a best place to probably spend a few days, then it could be they might find that they are actually living on the land of certain other tribes which who own that area, who have that influence, and then in that area, and then ultimately everyone would be fighting everyone else, right? Because most of them did not live a sedentary life. They did not have the kind of life which the other areas, and which where the people in other contemporary societies at that point in time lived, like in India. If you talk about 13th century India, India was full of cities, towns. It was full of them, right from today's Pakistan to Bengal, and right from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. It was full of cities and towns. But we are talking where people could be living in that particular town for generations, in that city for generations. But Mongols did not have that kind of a society, and that is what made them unique in a lot of ways. I don't know if I should say special, but definitely unique in a lot of ways, and that is what gave them certain unique abilities as well. Definitely unique characteristics, but also definitely unique abilities, unique skills, which normally you would not find with people who live a stationary life. And this is what we are talking about, and that is what made them very sturdy, and they were very strong people. And if some great leader could emerge, some great military general, like it happened once, when Genghis Khan shot into limelight. Yeah, of course, they were always battle hardy people, but Genghis Khan really brought all of them together, all the tribes, all the different sections of the Mongol population, right from east to west. He consolidated all that power, that strength, and made them into a very, very lethal and a dangerous fighting force, and ultimately helped them becoming world conquerors. And we shall let's do it tomorrow. Thank you.